his actual self-portrait, and he uses, as you can see, tiny dots to create different colors selectively, to create that value, to make that image pop. We won't be using color for our project because that's going to be a little more difficult, but we will be focusing on value shades with dots, and I'll teach you how to do that throughout the presentation. So, pointillism is really prevalent in our culture. A lot of you have cell phones, I see. A lot of you have computers. Some of you may read the newspaper, and I would imagine a lot of you watch television. What happens is this technology takes these colors, and they actually have little pixels of them, and they put them into the screen, and that's what creates our images. So as I'm referencing how art has an important influence with culture, culture has an important influence on our art and what we see through visual media. Our project that we'll be focusing on, we're going to create a final project out of pointillism, and we'll use points to create value of a portrait of an animal that your personality best relates to. For instance, I like music, so maybe I want to choose a bird or something that sings a song or a tune. I'm a very loyal person to my friends, so maybe I want to do a dog. Maybe you're protective of your siblings or your family members or friends, so maybe you might do like a bear. Some people consider themselves playful or fun. A kitten would be a good example. So just keep that thinking in your mind, what animal best represents a piece of your personality? Because you'll be using that to select an image for your portrait. And I'm going to be very brief. I'm diving straight into the project objective. So this will be a very important part where we'll learn about value and what is expected of you during the pointillism project. As we stated previously before in the very beginning of class, we mentioned contours when we were doing that hand drawing. Contour is really, really significantly important when you want to create shadow. The dictionary term of contour is the outline of a figure, body, or mass. But the definition in art for contour is very similar. It's the outline of shapes. These actual shapes, they're the outline, the shapes of the shadow, and those shapes tell us exactly where the shadow is located. It's kind of like a paint by numbers. If any of you have gone to Hobby Lobby and seen one of those, the contour serves like a paint by numbers, and we use those shapes to block in the shadow. So then we can create our pointillism portrait to create a lot of value, depth, and definition. So we will be discussing shadow. Oh, they're on the cutting board. Thank you. Usually when I have notes or if we're doing a presentation that involves notes, I'll be placing them right near the entrance so you guys can see it. So ladies and gentlemen can see it. That way it's easily accessible. So as we discussed before in our syllabus, we were doing geometric shapes.
Excuse me, interruption. If you have not already done so, please send the seniors who will be taking the morning session of the NAEP test to the large group instruction room at this time. Let's just do this yesterday.
For those of you that are going to the test right now, I'm going to actually, as you can see, I'm recording it on my phone. I'm going to post this on the YouTube, so if you need to fill in your notes later, it will be on YouTube via presentation on that website that I have right now. So we're going to be discussing shadow. First step to shadow is that you first have to do that contour drawing. It's really, really critical that you get that contour drawing in, or else you won't know where to place your shadow. So I made a template here, and it has that sphere that we're talking about. The sphere is one of the most hardest things to create because it's three-dimensional. It moves through space. So we'll be creating a contour of our image onto a grid paper, which I'll discuss later. So contour is outline of shadow. We then will be identifying cast shadow, just like everyone was identifying cast shadow at the very beginning of our still life project. We'll be doing the same methods as we do in the still life project into this actual project that we're going to be doing now. Cast shadow is created when an object stands in the way of the light. However, all cast shadows begin with a hard edge at the base of the object, and I have this outlined in green right here, where at the very object it starts at the plate, and it's very hard edge, and then it starts getting fuzzy and feathered out. You might see this on your actual note. You'll see it better when we have more light. And as the edge moves farther from the base, it becomes more feathered. Because remember, atmospheric perspective, things get more blurry, more fuzzy as they move back into space. So as it gets here, this kind of melts into the actual shape of the table, and it's very hard to define, but as it gets closer, it gets much more clear and crystal clear on where depth is shown. As the cast shadow moves farther from the object, it gets lighter. So not only does this edge get lighter, as you can see at the base, closer to the base, the cast shadow is stronger, so it's darker. But as it moves out, you can see from here to here, there are two different values. They're getting lighter. Same thing here. There's a dark line here, and as it moves away, it gets lighter. And there's a dark line here. As it moves away, it gets lighter. But right here, light is peeking through, so it's going to look a little more light on that side, if you guys were wondering, in case you were wondering. So on your sheet, there should be a section where it says locate cast shadow. I apologize about the image being very small, but do your best to just try to take your pencil and trace around what you believe is the cast shadow. Do it lightly, because we will, in the next slide, we will locate that shadow. And after you find a few of them, feel free to call out what you think is a cast shadow, so then we can identify where we sit in our knowledge of cast shadows. Has anyone found the cast shadow so far? Or is currently working on it? I see some of you have identified a cast shadow. Feel free to call out. We're all here to help each other out. What do you think a cast shadow might be, Jessica? The big urn, right here next to that vase. Again, where is it in front? Is the urn's shadow in front or behind? Where's the light hitting? Behind. Yep. So she identified this one as the actual cast shadow. Can anyone else give me an example of cast shadow? Shane.
A flower.
Right here?
Yeah, in that one.
Right here?
Yep.
Yeah, very, very good. That's an excellent example. May I take one more example? And then we'll move off to the next slide, I promise. Jordan?
There's one in the middle of everything?
Right. But we'll discuss that in the next couple of slides.
Behind it.
Behind it? Like right here?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean in the middle of this composition, like right here?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I got confused there for a second. Excellent input, everyone. Here is the actual outlines of all the shadows. You don't have to absolutely outline every single one of them, but if you have the main ones that you've outlined, like 2 or 3 main ones, and then 2 small ones, so then you can see that even small objects have cast shadow. Cast shadow is when this light is shining down in this direction, just like with your silhouette. The cast shadow is behind the object where the light is shining. So that's why they're all behind here, because the light's actually in front, shining in a triangular manner. Because that's why they go off like that. So cast shadow can help you identify where light might be. Now, as we do the cast shadow in your actual portrait of your animal, the first step is to block out all the shapes. So first we outline the shapes, we block them out. The second step is to treat every single shape as a whole. So this whole shape right here, it's wise to work on it as a whole, not to focus on one singular area, but to actually spread out and make all the dots evenly. And that way you'll have a sense of evenness and clarity and unity throughout your whole piece. So right here, I outlined this in your actual pointillism project. There's not going to be hard outlines like this. You're actually going to work on making the shadow be hard near the base of an object, and as it goes out, it gets more and more space. So as it moves further, it becomes more feathered. So the first step, as I put on figure 1, that's what we did. Now we're going to move on to the second step. When you think darker shades, just like when you use hatching or when you use side-by-side shading that you used in your still life that we did yesterday, darker shades have more dots, just like darker shades in drawing have more pressure or more lines next to them. Lighter shades have less dots and more space between the dots. So think this is less space, so it's going to be closer together. It's going to look like we're more like a one. Let's imagine that we're shadows. It's going to look like we're more connected and that we're one shadow. But if I'm all over here and there's more space between us, then I'm going to look like there's less people or less dots in the congregated area. So the third step is to build on what you've drawn. So as the shadow gets darker, it nears the base of the object, right along here. And as we discussed earlier, more dots go into there. And as the shadow moves lighter, and it moves from the base, so there'll be more space. So these have less space, some more space, and extremely lot of space. Eventually, when you get to that step, it's going to look sort of like this, and it's going to blend together. But as you begin, don't be worried about it looking very dotty. That's natural. It's okay. So the form, it's critical that you know what form is. When you were doing your actual still life, the form was actually the object being drawn. So you can also call the form as an object. Cast shadows are created when the form or object blocks the light. This is your cast shadow. This is not your form shadow. All the shadows that are on the form belong to the form. The cast shadow is totally different. It's sort of separate from that. It's kind of like when you're walking down the street and the sunlight's shining on you and you have a shadow behind you. The shadow's not a part of you. It's a reflection of you. So it's a reflection of you when the light is not present. So think of cast shadow as the reflection of the light, when the reflection of the object when the light's not present, and think of the form as the actual being presented. So when we're doing our pointillism project, your animal's going to be your form. And your cast shadow is going to be either behind the animal or next to the animal, considering where your light's coming from. Now the core shadow, this is where I got confused when Jordan was telling me that it's in the center of all the objects. I actually thought he was talking about core shadow for a second. Core shadow is the darkest part of the form. Core shadow is on the form. So right here, some people get confused and think this is core shadow because it's really dark right here. But this shadow is separate from the form. This is part of your cast shadow. Cast shadow has three parts. The darkest part that's near the base, the middle as it's moving away, and the lightest part is farthest away from the cast shadow. So this area has nothing to do with core shadow. Core shadow is going to always be on your forms or your objects that you're drawing, such as your animal or your still life object. It's the place where the light meets the shadow on the form. It's where they come together and create that really crisp, clear, dark edge. As it gets darker, that's where the core of the shadow is. It's usually followed by reflected light. For instance, it's really hard to see it right here. There's some reflected light right here. And then the midtone is kind of grayish dark. And then right here is where your core shadow is going to be. It's the edge between light and dark values on the form. And the next slide will be identifying where the forms are. So, can anyone just randomly call out what you might see as a form or an object that's being drawn here? Claire. The stapler, very good. George.
The shadow on the apple on the piece of paper.
Yeah, awesome. We have about at least 2 or 3 more. So I'll take 2 more examples. What do you think, Lucas? Yep, the paper airplane. Shane?
The ball.
And the bowl. The glass is also on as well, but due to time, I'm trying to get us in by 8 o'clock, so then we can start looking at our images. So I'm going to briefly list exactly what were the forms that we were drawing here. And I may have missed a few, but you get the general idea. So the forms of the objects being drawn. So the core shadow, where would that be? Claire listed the stapler as one, so let's look at the stapler. Where would the core shadow be on the stapler? So look at where the shadow begins. Where do you think the shadow begins? Jordan.
On the side of the stapler.
Right along here, right?
Yeah.
Side. That's an excellent example. Because right here is the light, the dark, here's your reflected light, and right here's your core coming in. The darkest spot on the object. Highlight. The next step after locating those 2 dark spots, we're going to skip over form shadow for right now and go straight to the highlights, because it's easier to find highlights than it is for that filler or form shadow. So the highlights are the brightest areas on the form. It is where light is directly hitting the object. So this area you may think is highlight, but it's not. This is a lighter tone on the form, which is also known as lighter filler shadow. This area is the actual highlight because it's the brightest white. No value will be in here. Highlights are normally found in areas like the shine inside the eyes of your animal. It could be along the cheekbone where light hits because your bone is protruding outward, so it's more likely to gather more light. Highlights add crispness to the drawing. And the subtle grays around the white area, right here. Subtle grays, here's your, sort of like your highlight, here's some subtle grays here. That's what makes the highlight pop. That's when you think of gradient or gradual movement from darkness to light, that gray area creates that pop to the highlight, gives them something to jump off from. So highlight is where the light is casting directly upon the object. So what are a few examples here? Just list one letter out of all these, because they're all located in the same area where the shadow is supposed to be. So list one letter that represents highlight in here. Claire. A. She's right. It is A, because it's directly hitting on the object. The light source, we can assume, is coming from this corner and going downward, because it's on the top corner and is going diagonally across the top of the object. So after we locate highlight, we're going to then move to reflected light. This light can be kind of tricky because it can be mistaken as a lighter shadow or a lighter form shadow. But the best bet of identifying the actual reflected light is it's closer to the surface, because reflected light is reflecting light upon an object from another source. So reflected light is when light bounces off of something, such as the table or the ground here, and reflects back onto the object. So when you're thinking reflected light, it kind of takes in the shade or color almost of the surface that is underneath the object, but it's a little bit darker than that because it's in the darker area of the object. It's in the shadow. So here is a pepper. Peppers are kind of smooth and they have like a plasticity, so they have a very reflective surface. I'll take at least one example of where reflected light might be. Shane.
The two, like, on the side by the sticker. Like,
Right here?
yeah.
That's highlight because that's the whitest light. Look for something that's a little bit similar than that, that's closer to the tabletop. Because it does have some light in it. This area?
Yeah.
Very good. That's where we're going to have some trouble here. That's why it's critical that you know the difference between highlight and reflected light, because it might actually take almost a similar form. Just remember, reflected light is usually in the shadows. It's going to be a little bit darker than the highlight. So this is reflected light right here, and this is going to take some practice. And sometimes, if it's a really reflective surface like this pepper here, the pepper might actually, or the object might actually reflect onto the surface. So it's a give and take. So it's critical that you know this. It's going to take practice. If you're frustrated with identifying it right now, that's okay, because that's natural. It's all about seeing and visually seeing the actual difference between shadow and shade, shadow and light. Right here, I didn't circle this, but see how it has a little bit of an oranger glow to it? That's reflected light. So even I have some trouble identifying where reflected light is. Form shadow is the last thing that you're going to fill in. So as you're filling this in, you're going to notice that the form shadow is going to be the rest of the blocks that are empty. There's a reason for this, because form shadow is so large and has two different types. So it's easier to identify all the other pieces, because they'll help piece together that large area that needs to be shaded in. So the rest of the shadow around the form is the form shadow. In this class, we're going to be calling it the filler shadow. It comes in two different parts, lighter halftones and darker halftones. We call them halftones because there's a process of going from one area of lightness to another area of darkness. So it's the halftones, because the most darkest tone is the core shadow, and the most lightest tone is the highlight. Form shadow for lighter tones consists of shadows that are closer to the light. So we got our highlight here. So when you're looking for actual lighter tones for your filler shadow, they're going to be located near the lit part of your animal or object. So, but they're not going to be the highlight. The highlight's the brightest part. Bear with me. We only have one more slide, and then we're going to be selecting our images. Everyone's doing excellent right now. I appreciate your patience. Form shadow is the exact opposite. This is your core shadow. Remember, your core shadow is your darkest area on your object. So everything near the core shadow is going to be your darker filler tone, or it's going to be your medium tone. This consists of shadows that are further from the light but are closer to the core shadow. Usually, when you have an object and it's on a surface, the next step closer to the cast shadow would be the reflected light, as you can see here. Okay. So, due to things being extremely procedural, I'm going to show you how to find an image, but Ms. Fritz is going to explain how to print it out, because if I end up explaining it wrong, she gets the brunt of my mistake, and I don't think that's fair. So I want to make sure that everything's clear. So your best bet is to go to Google, and I'm a very outgoing sort of person, and I like to joke around and have fun, but I also like to hang out with people, and I'm a very loyal person. So I'm gonna use a dog as an example of my animal. but I'm going to use a specific dog. So I'm going to use a Dalmatian. Now, when you're looking for your images here, do not pick something that's absolutely white all around. See, this would be sort of hard right here, this image that I've selected, because there's a lot of white. It's hard to identify light, really, really extremely bright white next to faint sort of, lightish white. It's very hard. I know that you're thinking, oh, well, there's less dots, so I won't have to, worry about it. But for your project, you need 5 values, from darkest to light, and you need to exemplify or show those values in your portrait. So it's going to be really hard to identify those two because they'll feel like they're melding together. So I'm going to make it a little more specific. I'm going to put drawing Dalmatian because it's going to show me the actual values here. Like right here, this is not as white as that image that I was showing you. See how there's some darker white, but it's more identifiable? So if you use an animal that has a lot of white in it, I highly suggest you using an animal that is drawn. So you're going to take this image here and you're going to open up your Word document when you meet in your table groups near the computers. You're going to right-click it and you're going to select Copy. You're going to go to your Word document and you're going to paste it in there. And you might want to actually view your Word document a little bit smaller than what you're used to, because you need to figure out if this is a full page or a half page. Right now it sort of almost looks like a half page, so I'm gonna zoom it out a bit, and if you try to move it, it's not going to work. Double click on it, go to text wrapping, go to square, and that's going to help you move your object.